Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Kauper. I'm a professor in the education department, as well as one of the professors of the first year seminar, Section G. I'm here to introduce you to an essay that we will all be reading and writing about, entitled Letter to My Son by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'll be providing a little bit of background of Coates and where he draws his inspiration from. And I will also highlight some of the themes that you'll be encountering as you read this essay and begin thinking about how you're going to respond to it in your upcoming paper assignment. Very briefly, Coates was and is a reporter for The Atlantic. He is a graduate of Howard University, a historically Black university, which he writes about in this letter to my son. He grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and you'll see some of his memories of living in Baltimore in this essay. He is also a very prolific writer. He writes in a lot of different genres. I'll be talking more about the book Between the World and Me. The essay Letter to My Son was originally published in The Atlantic, and then later became incorporated in this larger body of work called Between the World and Me. And again, I'll be talking about that more in a moment. He's also written other nonfiction work, including We Were 8 Years in Power, which is a series of essays that examine race relations in politics as a juxtaposition between the Reconstruction era and the Obama administration. He's also been a contributor to the comic book world. He draws from comic books for some of his inspiration, and he has written Black Panther in collaboration with Roxane Gay and Eve Ewing and other collaborators. He draws much of his inspiration from Black writers such as James Baldwin and Richard Wright. I'll be talking about their influences in a moment. As well as African and Cuban revolutionaries. So as I mentioned, Richard Wright and James Baldwin are have been powerfully impactful on Coates's work and ideas. Richard Wright, whose photograph you see to the left, was a novelist and a poet. And here in the middle, you see a poem by the title, Between the World and Me, which is where Coates gets his title for the book. In this poem, Wright is describing a lynching that the voice of the poem comes across. And I'll read a short excerpt from the poem. And one morning, while in the woods, I stumbled suddenly upon the thing, stumbled upon it in a grassy clearing guarded by scaly oaks and elms, and the sooty details of the scene rose, thrusting themselves between the world and me. And so the thing upon which the poet Richard Wright stumbles, is, in this first instance, the incinerated body of a Black man. But it's also, in this poem, a revelation of his own susceptibility to racialized violence. So Coates, in his essay, as well begins with the notion of the body and the destruction of the Black body. Racism, as Coates says, is always a visceral or bodily experience. And that is one of the larger themes, among the more poignant themes in this essay that you'll be reading. So you can see the influence of Wright in Coates's writing here. On the right, you see a book by James Baldwin titled The Fire Next Time. And this book is a collection written in the form of letters to his nephew. And in these letters to Baldwin's nephew, Baldwin provides some context and advice and a suggestion for life in this racialized society. And clearly, Coates looks to Baldwin in his own genre of writing in his letter to my son. And I'll talk about the genre of letters in just a moment. But that's one way that Baldwin influences Coates's writing of this piece. Another way that Baldwin is an influence on Coates's writing is through an essay that Baldwin wrote, I believe it was in 1968, titled On Being White and Other Lies. And in this piece, Baldwin examines the historic construction of whiteness over time, the ways that ethnic communities that have come to the United States, come to America, and in that process of integrating and assimilating into American society have then become white, while simultaneously further segregating the Black communities. And Baldwin raises the question of whiteness as a sort of figment of our imagination, this notion of the problematic nature of social constructions of race and how they are defined by the privileged. And that's what we see Coates doing quite a bit of in his piece, as you'll notice. Coates repeats the phrase, for those who believe they are white, or this belief in whiteness. And in that phrase, he is paying an homage. He's recognizing the influence of Baldwin in these ideas of social construction of race. And so I'll come now to the overarching themes that I've already mentioned. You'll come across the theme of whiteness and the historic construction of race, this theme of the dream, which I'll talk about in greater detail in the paper prompts, but for our purposes now, as you read, you might consider what Coates means by this idea of the dream. Is he referring to the American dream, this idea of white picket fences and house ownership, and the idea that if you work hard, you will succeed? Or is he referring to another type of dream, this state of existence that is not real? It's more mythological and illusory. And a third theme that you will encounter is this idea of the destruction of the Black body. And Coates writes about this not just metaphorically, but in actuality, in our current state of affairs, the destruction of Black bodies, police brutality, and the historic destruction of Black bodies through enslavement. So as you read, you're going to want to pay close attention to the tone and the voice that Coates uses in his word choices and the way that he incorporates sentence fluency throughout the essay. And then, of course, your attention to the themes, which I've already described some of, but you may uncover other themes as you read along. Also, as you read, you will want to highlight passages and unfamiliar terms. For example, you might not have previously been familiar with the nature of historically Black colleges and universities. And Coates writes about his time at Howard University as a rite of passage. And here he's exposed to new ideas and a diversity of Black lives, a diversity of Black voices, and a diversity of Black ideas and ideas about Blackness. I want to also highlight the importance of reading aloud. I'm not going to read aloud to you, although in your class, you will probably spend some time reading aloud at least the first few pages of this essay. And the value of doing that has to do with the idea that reading aloud allows us to better appreciate the fluency and tone of ideas in the piece. And it also improves one's vocabulary by listening to text being read aloud, and improves reading comprehension as well. It also highlights the need for careful listening habits. And it's an important departure from the digital world that we are usually in when we are taking the time to listen to a carefully crafted text that is being read aloud. It's a departure from the mediums that you're used to consuming. So I just wanted to highlight that importance of reading aloud. And at this point, you'll want to pause this video and take the time to read the first 5 pages of the essay up until the point where you arrive at the sentence, "The boy with the small eyes," on page 6. And then we will continue in Coates's own voice. He is reading here from his book, Between the World and Me, that picks up with the phrase, "the boy with the small eyes."
The boy with the small eyes reached into his ski jacket and pulled out a gun. I recall it in the slowest of motions, as though in a dream. There the boy stood with the gun brandished, which he slowly untucked, tucked, and then untucked once more. And in his small eyes, I saw a surging rage that could, in an instant, erase my body. That was 1986. That year I felt myself to be drowning in the news reports of murder. I was aware that these murders very often did not land upon the intended targets, but fell upon great aunts, PTA mothers, overtime uncles, and joyful children. Fell upon them random and relentless, like great sheets of rain. I knew this in theory, but could not understand it as fact until the boy with the small eyes stood across from me, holding my entire body in his small hands. The boy did not shoot. His friends pulled him back. He did not need to shoot. He had affirmed my place in the order of things. He had let it be known how easily I could be selected. I took the subway home that day, processing the episode all alone. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell my teachers. And if I told my friends, I would have done so with all the excitement needed to obscure the fear that came over me in that moment. I remember being amazed that death could so easily rise up from the nothing of a boyish afternoon, billow up like fog. I knew that West Baltimore, where I lived, that the north side of Philadelphia, where my cousins lived, that the south side of Chicago, where the friends of my father lived, comprised a world apart. Somewhere out there beyond the firmament, past the asteroid belt, there were other worlds where children did not regularly fear for their bodies.
And so now you'll continue reading the essay on your own, highlighting passages that really speak to you, identifying areas that you would like to have more clarification about, or that raise some questions for you. And you'll be engaging in an exploration of other sources that lend some context to what Coates is talking about in this essay. And then shortly you'll be introduced to the paper and the prompts that you'll be choosing from in order to respond to this essay. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing what all of you come up with in your written pieces. Take care.